Hello, America. My name is Dylan John, and you are listening to Nature and the Nation. For today's episode, I will be looking at The Rage and the Pride by Oriana Fallaci. This was a controversial book when it came out. It was published in 2001 in Italian and then in 2002 in English, and it was a bestseller in Italy. It's the first of a series that she wrote, and I have the second in the series, but I don't have the third, and hopefully I will get to the second and acquire the third and review the third sometime down the road. But for now, we'll just stick with the first in the series. It's not necessary to read the others to understand her point. This was controversial because it criticizes Islam pretty severely, which is fine with me. I think Islam deserves a healthy dose of criticism, particularly with regards to how it interacts with Europe. What the Muslims do in their home countries, it's just not so much of a concern of mine. But what they do in Europe concerns me much more. Europe is a part of my civilization. Even though I'm in America, I still look at Europe as a part of a larger global civilization. You can call it Western civilization if you like. I prefer Northern civilization. I think that's more accurate and helps to clarify the conflict that is unfolding between the global North and the global South. Talking about Western civilization is an artifact of the Cold War when we talk about the East and the West, Western Europe and Eastern Europe and the Soviet bloc and everything. But Western Europe is not the core of the civilization when viewed in the global scale. What you're really talking about is the North. And that includes Eastern Europe, it includes Russia, it includes the United States, and it includes Australia, even though Australia is not in the North. I think it probably, I don't know. I won't talk about Australia right now. That's getting too off topic. But this was published in 2001, as I said, in Italian, so it was published shortly after. It was written pretty much immediately after, and then published shortly after the September 11th attacks in New York City. And this is written as a response to that. And I think she had always been critical of Islam. She interviewed some famous people, Khomeini in Iran, and it was a hostile, confrontational interview. I think she has long been critical of Islam, and most of her criticism of Islam, I believe, really came through in this book. I think she had been critical prior to the publication of this, but it really shines through here. And there she was subjected to lawsuits because you know how it is in Europe. You're not allowed to say certain things, and you're especially not allowed to offend the delicate Muslims. So she was subjected to lawsuits. I don't know how those turned out. I think they were. I think at least one political inquiry was dismissed by the Italian government, but I'm not sure that all of her lawsuits were dismissed. But the point is that she was somewhat persecuted for this book, and to a lesser extent, I think the two follow-up books, although they're along the same lines. She was born in the 1920s, late 1920s. She was a resistance fighter in the Second World War. I guess fighting against, I would assume fighting against Mussolini. She was not a fan of the Nazis or the fascists of Italy. She was not a fan of Islam. She was a fan of the United States. She writes glowingly in this about the United States. She lived in the United States. She lived in New York City on 9/11. And And I think she absolutely adored the United States. And there were some sections where she talks with praise about the United States that I thought about that I might read for you, but I decided I would skip them because I want to focus specifically on her criticisms of Islam. I want to focus on some of her descriptions of events in Italy that had to do with Muslim immigrants. I'm not as concerned with 9/11 or the United States in this book. I'm concerned here because I don't think Islamic immigration, I think it's a problem in the United States, but it's not anywhere close to the problem that it presents to Europe. In Europe, Islamic immigration is a huge problem. They're flooding Europe, and by the end of the century, Europe will be Muslim. It will be a Muslim land, primarily, I believe, at the current rates of immigration. Anyhow, like all my books, I'm going to read a couple sections, provide a little bit of commentary. I want to get a glimpse into her mind and into her criticisms of Islam. This was almost 25 years ago, and she saw it way before most people did. It's become an issue. It has been sort of an issue for a long time, but it was a fringe issue until more recently. Some people would like to think it's still a fringe issue, but it's not. It is becoming the singular most important issue across the entire northern world. But she was ahead of the curve, which is unsurprising because I think she was a very intelligent woman. Anyhow, I'm going to read a couple sections here, and I want to start with, I guess this is a brief little overview of what she's talking about. And after she's done talking about 9/11 in America, she begins to turn to talk about Europe. And she says, quote, "Wake up, folks, wake up. As intimidated as you are by the fear of going against the stream and looking racist," a grossly erroneous word, by the way, because the problem has nothing to do with a race, it has to do with a religion. "You don't understand or don't want to understand that a reverse crusade is on march. As blinded as you are by the myopia and the stupidity of the politically correct, you don't realize or don't want to realize that a war of religion is being carried out, a war they call jihad. A war that does not aim at the conquest of our territory, maybe, but certainly aims at the conquest of our souls and at the disappearance of our freedom. A war which is conducted to destroy our civilization, our way of living and dying, of praying or not praying, of eating and drinking and dressing and studying and enjoying life. As numbed as you are by the propaganda of the falsehood, you don't put, or do not want to put, in your mind that if we do not defend ourselves, if we do not fight, the jihad will win. It will win, yes, and destroy the world that somehow or other we have been able to build. To change, to improve, to make more intelligent, less bigoted, or not bigoted at all. It will cancel our culture, our art, our science, our identity, our morals, our values, our pleasures. By God, don't you see that all these Osama bin Ladens consider themselves authorized to kill you and your children because you drink alcohol? Because you don't grow the long beard and refuse the chador or the burqa? Because you go to the theater and to the movies? Because you love music and sing a song? Because you dance and watch television? Because you wear the miniskirt or the shorts? Because on the beach and by the swimming pool you sunbathe almost naked or naked? Because you make love when you want and with whom you want? Or because you don't believe in God? I am an atheist, thank God, and I have no intention of being punished for this by retrograde bigots who, instead of contributing to the improvement of humanity, salam and squawk prayers 5 times a day. For 20 years I have been repeating it. 20. with a certain mildness, not with this rage and this pride. 20 years ago, I wrote an editorial. It was the editorial of a person inured to living with all races and habits and beliefs, of a woman accustomed to opposing any fascism and any intolerance, of a laic without any taboos. But it was also the scream of a Westerner, full of indignation, towards the idiots who did not smell the bad smell of a holy war to come, and who tolerated the abuses that the sons of Allah were committing in Europe with their terrorism. My reasoning went more or less this way 20 years ago. What logic is there in respecting those who do not respect us? What dignity is there in defending their culture, or supposed culture, when they show contempt for ours? I want to defend my culture, not theirs. And I inform you that I like Dante Alighieri and Shakespeare and Goethe and Verlaine and Walt Whitman and Leopardi much more than Omar Khayyam. Well, I got crucified. You racist, dirty racist. It was our cicadas who crucified me with the fraudulent word racist. And later, that is, during the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, they did it again. They did it because each time the bearded warriors yelled Allah Akbar while shooting the mortar, I had a foreboding and said, let's admit it. Soviets are what they are, but in this case, we should thank them. Besides, I got crucified also when I pointed out what they used to do to the Soviet prisoners. I mean, when they cut off their arms and their legs. The same atrocity, don't forget, they performed at the end of the 19th century on Queen Victoria's ambassadors and on other European diplomats based in Kabul. After such mutilation, they decapitated the victims still alive, and with the head cut, they played buskachi, a sort of Afghan polo. And for the arms and the legs, they sold them as trophies in the bazaar. I got crucified then, too, yes. They didn't even like the fact that I cried on the armless and legless Ukrainian recruits, who, having been abandoned by those barbarians and recovered by their comrades, now lay in the field hospitals imploring, let me die. They called me racist for that too, remember? While calling me racist, they cheered the Americans who, crazy with fear of the Soviet Union, gave the barbarians support and weapons, trained a young Saudi named Osama bin Laden, and shouted, hooray, the heroic Afghan people, down with the Soviets! Soviets, get out of Afghanistan! Well, the Soviets got out, Osama bin Laden remained, and sent his kamikazes to America. End quote. So you can see here she says she's been raising a ruckus for 20 years, and she's writing in 2001. So you're talking not the 1981, the early 1980s, maybe the late 1970s, from the fall of the Shah of Iran. She's been speaking about it and consistently called a racist. And she talks about the barbarity of what they did to the Soviets that they captured, where they cut their arms and legs off, cut their heads off, and played games with the heads. Total barbarians. And she says basically, look, there's a war here. There's a war being fought, and you don't even understand it. She says you don't understand, or you don't want to understand, that a reverse crusade is on the march, because you're blinded by political correctness. You refuse to recognize the jihad that is being waged. And this is in 2001. Immigration was a problem, but not nearly the problem it is now. So she says, maybe they're not trying to conquer the territory. Well, I think we know now that they are. But she says they're trying to destroy our civilization. She says, don't you understand that they want to kill you? She says they consider themselves authorized to kill you and your children because you drink alcohol, or you go to the theater, or you sing, you like music, you watch TV, you wear the mini skirts, you sunbathe without any clothes on. You know how they are in Europe? Or maybe you don't believe in God. She's an atheist. Oriana Fallaci is an atheist. She says, I'm an atheist. And they would punish me. They would put me to death for this. She's very critical. She says they don't contribute to the improvement of humanity. They just say prayers all day long and kill people. And she said she wrote a editorial 20 years prior, and she was crucified for it. She says she was crucified by the cicadas. She uses that word, the cicadas, kind of like the locusts, and just noisemakers, mindless noisemakers. And every time she speaks against them, she's crucified again and again, being called racist. And what has really changed? And then everybody cheered on the Taliban, the Afghanis, when they were fighting the Soviets. And that's just mind-blowing, of course, that we, in our opposition to the Soviets, we trained and armed Osama bin Laden, set him up. That came back to bite us in the rear. So there you get the sort of beginning overview. And then talking a little bit more about the nature of this so-called reverse crusade. She says, quote, "In this world, there is room for everybody. In their own houses, their own countries. People do what they want. Therefore, if in the Muslim countries, women are so stupid as to wear the chador or the burqa, if they are so silly as to accept the fact of counting less than a camel, if they are so foolish as to marry a dissolute who wants 4 wives, all the worse for them. If their men are so silly as to refuse a glass of wine or beer, the same. I will not be the one who interferes with their choices. I was educated in the concept of freedom, damn it, and my mother used to say, the world is interesting because it is various. But if they try to impose those insanities on me, on my life, my country, if they want to substitute my culture with their culture, or presumed culture, they do. Osama bin Laden has declared that the whole planet Earth must become Muslim, that with good or bad manners he will convert us, that to achieve this purpose he kills us, he will continue to kill us. And this cannot be accepted, even by the ultra-simpleton or cynical supporter of Islam. So, imagine, it can be accepted by me. As a matter of fact, it gives me a tremendous urgency to turn the tables and kill him. The problem is that the solution does not depend upon the death of Osama bin Laden, because the Osama bin Ladens are too many by now, as cloned as the sheep of our research laboratories. Moreover, they are no longer the bold Moors who conquered Spain and Portugal riding camels and fighting with golden scimitars. Times change. Today, they are these shrewd tricksters to whom we teach how to pilot a 757 jet, how to use a sophisticated computer, how to fabricate a nuclear weapon, how to destroy or block up an electrical system, a communication system, a financial system, how to unleash an epidemic virus, how to blackmail a government, how to manipulate a pope, how to seduce and exploit the media and the intellectual or so-called intellectual world. That is, how to influence Western minds, including the minds of the people in good faith, by controlling their daily environment. In fact, the best trained and the more intelligent do not stay in the Muslim countries, in the caves of Afghanistan, or in the mosques of Iran and Pakistan. They stay in our countries, in our cities, our universities, our business companies. They have excellent bonds with our churches, our banks, our televisions, our radios, our newspapers, our publishers, our academic organizations, our unions, our political parties. They nest in the ganglia of our technology. Worse, they live in the heart of a society that hosts them without questioning their differences, without checking their bad intentions, without penalizing their sullen fanaticism. A society that keeps them in the spirit of its permissive democracy, its unconstrained broad-mindedness, its Christian pity, its liberal principles, its civilized laws. The laws that have abolished torture and capital punishment, that Do not allow to arrest you if a crime has not been committed. Do not authorize to judge you if you are not defended by a lawyer. Do not permit to condemn you if the accusation has not been proved. The laws, or should I say the loopholes, that consent to cancel a sentence or to release a delinquent. As for those loopholes, well, isn't it thanks to them that our guests settle in our territory, and they intrude in our life and vex and boss us? During a synod that the Vatican held on October 1999 to discuss the rapport between Christians and Muslims, an eminent scholar addressed the stunned audience, declaring with placid effrontery, "By means of your democracy we shall invade you, by means of our religion we shall dominate you." The worrying report is provided by one of the participants, His Eminence Monsignor Giuseppe Bernardini, Archbishop of the Turkish Diocese of Smyrna. As you see, their reverse crusade does not need a modern ferocious Saladin or some kind of Napoleon to take place and develop. With or without Saladins and Napoleons, it is an irreversible fact, an ever-growing reality, that the West senselessly feeds and backs up, which is the reason why those crusaders become more and more, demand more and more, boss around more and more. Also, the reason why, if we continue to stay inert, they will become always more and more. They will demand always more and more. They will vex and boss us always more and more, to the point of subduing us. Therefore, dealing with them is impossible, attempting a dialogue unthinkable, showing indulgence suicidal. And he or she who believes the contrary is a fool. End quote. So there she lays it out pretty clearly. She says, look, I've always believed that variety is the spice of life. Different people can do different things. They want to do things their way. That's fine. But they can do things their way in their own countries. But that's not what's happening, is it? They're showing up to demand that we do things their way. She says if they try to impose those insanities on me, and they do. They've already declared, Osama bin Laden declared, that the whole planet Earth must become Muslim. And there are too many of them. There are millions of them. And they're educated. They're not riding around on camels. They know how to do all these various things because we taught them how to do it. All the sorts of things one would need to do to bring society to its knees. And moreover, they have access to the media, the intellectual, so-called intellectual world. They've learned how to influence Western minds. And the smartest of them, and the most educated of them, the most capable of them, are all living in the West. And the society that they live in questions nothing. Never questions. Why are they here? Never questions. Why are they trying to impose their laws, their customs? We see this so much now. I keep coming back to this, like she was so ahead of the curve. She was so ahead of the curve in seeing this in 2001 and being able to, point back to the early 80s or late 70s when she started seeing what was going on. And she says basically that it's the sort of open-minded liberalness. It's all of the liberal laws, the civilization, the nature of the civilization, all these constraints on the government. You're not allowed to be arrested if there's no crime. You need to have a lawyer defend you. There's all sorts of protections against being unfairly targeted by the state. And she says they've used these as loopholes. They've used our freedoms to gain a foothold. But people go on about their lives in a state of ignorance. And it's unbelievable. It's totally unbelievable. She says 1999. An Islamic scholar says, in the Vatican, we are going to dominate you with our religion. By means of your democracy, we shall invade you. By means of our religion, we shall dominate you. That's insane that they come and they say this and we are just tone deaf. And it's true. They use our systems against us. Our democracies, our liberalism, our pity, our freedom, all the various values. They find a way to twist and turn to their advantage. And I think it's a quote from Dune, isn't it? That when I am weak, I ask for your freedom, because that is according to your principles. And when I am strong, I take away your freedom, because that is according to my principles. I think that's from Dune. But people use it. I've heard it used in reference to the modern situation with Islam in Europe. And similar to the quote here, but when they're out of power, they exploit the system of Europe. But when they're in power, they won't offer you the same protections that they exploited, because they will understand at that time how exploitable it is. Well, anyway, let's jump to the next section. She talks a little bit here about this situation that occurred where apparently there was a big tent set up in Florence by Somalis who were upset about their passports. And it's just insane. It's insane the way that things have gone. I can never quite wrap my head around it. I almost feel like it's too insane to believe just how naive, gullible, stupid, cowardly the people are in power in Europe who have allowed all this to happen. But liberalism is, I once thought that I think it's, who is it? Ann Coulter, I think, has a book called Liberalism is a Mental Disorder. And I thought, well, that's a little extreme, don't you think? This was years ago. I thought, that sounds like a bit much. A mental disorder? That sounds like a bit much. This is why people don't read conservative books. It's all hyperbole. A mental disorder, really? But as time goes by, one starts to wonder, what is wrong with these people? How could you possibly be so stupid? So blind? She says, quote, I do not go to erect tents at Mecca. I do not go to recite paternosters and Ave Marias in front of the prophet's tomb. I do not go to urinate on the walls of their mosques, even less to defecate on them. When I am in their countries, something from which I don't derive any kind of pleasure, I never forget that I am a guest and a foreigner. I pay attention not to offend them with clothes or gestures or behaviors which are normal for us but unacceptable for them. I treat them with dutiful respect, dutiful courtesy, concern. I apologize if, out of ignorance or lack of attention, I break some of their rules or superstitions. And when, in my memory, the two blown-up skyscrapers mix with the two blown-up Buddhas, I also see the image, not apocalyptic, but for me equally symbolic, of the enormous tent that 2 summers ago disfigured the cathedral square of Florence, my city. An enormous tent, erected by Somali Muslims. Somalia is a country with deep connections to Osama bin Laden, remember, and also the country where, in 1993, 17 Peace Force Marines were slaughtered and maimed, to blame the Italian government that, for once, hesitated to renew their passports and to accept the hordes of their relatives, mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, uncles, aunts, cousins, pregnant wives, and possibly the relatives of their relatives. A tent erected near the Archbishop Palace on the sidewalk, on which they used to leave the shoes and the bottles of water with which they washed their feet before the prayer. Therefore, placed in front of the Santa Maria del Fiore Cathedral and a few steps from the baptistery. A tent furnished like a small apartment, tables, chairs, chaise lounges, matelas to sleep and to fuck, ovens to cook and to stink up the square. Therefore open to every show. A tent equipped with electricity, plus enriched by a tape playing the voice of a muezzin who continually exhorted the faithful, reproached the unfaithful, injuriously suffocated the beautiful sound of the bells. And along with all this, the yellow streaks of urine that profaned the millinery marbles of the baptistery as well as its golden doors. Good heavens! They really take long shots, these sons of Allah. How could they succeed in hitting so well that target, protected by a balcony and more than 2 yards distant from their urinary apparatus? With the yellow streaks of urine, the stench of the excrements that blocked the main entrance of the San Salvatore al Vescovo, the exquisite Romantic church, 9th century, that stands near the square and that the sons of Allah had transformed into a latrine like the churches of 1982 Beirut. You know, because it was I who called you and asked you to intervene on your newspaper. Remember? I also called the mayor of Florence, who immediately paid me a visit, humbly endured my fury, shyly admitted that my protests were legitimate. You are right, really right. But he did not remove the tent. He forgot. Or better yet, he lacked the guts. I also called the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who was a Florentine, speaking with a very Florentine accent, and who had the power to authorize or deny the renewal of the foreign passports. And he too endured my fury. He too admitted that my protests were legitimate. You are right, really right, but he didn't do a thing to remove the tent. Like the mayor, he forgot. Or better, he lacked the guts. Then, more than 3 months had elapsed, I changed my tactics. I called the policeman who ran the city's security office and barked, "Dear policeman, I am not a politician. When I say something, I really mean it. If, by tomorrow, you don't remove the damn tent, I burn it. I swear on my honor that I burn it, and that not even a regiment of soldiers could prevent it. And for this, I want to be arrested, handcuffed, locked in jail, arrested, so the newspapers and the TV stations will report that Fallaci had been incarcerated in her own city for defending her own city. And this will throw shit on all of you." Well, being more intelligent than the others, within a few days the policeman removed the damn tent. All that remained in its place was an immense and disgusting stain on the square's pavement, meaning the filthy residues of the 3.5 months horrid bivouac. End quote. So here you have a situation. They want their Somalis in Italy. They want their passports renewed. I mean, I keep saying this, so prophetic. They want to bring all of their family members and their family members' family members. They want their passports renewed. They're foreigners. They're not even citizens. She says, I called you to ask you to intervene on your newspaper. She's talking to this whole book was originally designed to be a newspaper article. It expanded and expanded and expanded into a book. But when she's addressing the reader, she's addressing the editor of the newspaper. But at any rate, she contacted various politicians, and every one of them was spineless. Oh, yeah, you're right. Absolutely. You're right. Agreed. Yeah, agreed with everything she said. Nodded along, and then did nothing. And that shouldn't surprise anyone. Incapable of doing what is necessary. Spineless worms. The entire continent is managed by spineless worms with very rare exception. Pissing and shitting all over the place, these Somalis. In their tent, in the areas around their tent. Ancient churches, buildings from the 9th century getting pissed on and shat on, used as latrines. And they will burn your beautiful oak door, as has been said. They don't care. That's the pissing and the shitting is the point. They're pushing. See how much they can get away with. They're probably shocked at what they can get away with. Continuing, she says, quote, "Mine was a poor victory, a Pyrrhic victory, indeed. It was because immediately afterwards the Somali passports were renewed by the Minister of Foreign Affairs with a very Florentine accent, and all the Somali requests were accepted by the government. Today, the protesters and their fathers, their mothers, their brothers, their sisters, their uncles, their aunts, their cousins, their pregnant wives, who in the meantime have given birth, are all settled where they want to settle. I mean in Florence and in other cities of Europe. It was a poor and Pyrrhic victory also, because the removal of the tent did not change the various outrages that for decades have been humiliating the city that was the capital of art, of culture, of beauty, and because the incident did not dishearten the other Muslim intruders, the Albanians, the Sudanese, the Bengalese, the Tunisians, the Egyptians, the Algerians, the Pakistanis, the Nigerians, who fervidly contribute to the commerce of drugs, apparently a sin not condemned by the Quran. With them, the peddlers who infest our streets and squares to sell fake watches or pencils, the steady vendors who expose their merchandise on little carpets placed on the sidewalk, the prostitutes who ply their trade and spread AIDS even along the country roads, the thieves who assault the country houses, especially at night, and don't you dare face them with a revolver because, in such case, you are the one who goes to jail, along with the accusation of racism, of course. Oh yes, all of them are where they were before my policemen removed the tent. The steady vendors squat even inside the splendid courtyard, between the two arcades of the Uffizi galleries, the Vasari courtyard. They even block up the access to the museums and to the libraries. For instance, the ancient Laurentian library, the one that preserves treasures like the millenary Virgilian Code or the Middle Ages illuminated texts, and the glorious National Library. They also occupy the area surrounding the Tower of Giotto, the span of the old bridge where they encamp in front of the jewelry shops, and the sidewalks bordering the Arno River, my lovely Lungarni. They also lodge on the ultra-centenary church's parvises. For instance, the parvis of San Lorenzo Basilica, the spot where, publicly disobeying the prophet, they get drunk, and when drunk they harass women. Last summer they even harassed me, who am by now an antique lady, and it goes without saying that they heavily paid for their effrontery. One is still moaning over his genitals. The pretext, of course, is selling their merchandise, but by merchandise they mean leather goods fabricated on models protected by a patent, thus illegal. They mean posters, postcards, cheap watches, African statuettes that illiterate tourists believe to be Renaissance sculptures, and, I repeat, drugs. "I know my rights," a Nigerian drug vendor hissed to me in French when I threatened to have him arrested. And his were the same words that 2 years before, in Porta Romana Square, an extremely young son of Allah had pronounced after lasciviously grasping my breast and inevitably receiving a fierce kick in the genitals. "I know my rights." They also request and obtain to be financially supported by the municipality. They also demand and obtain the construction of new mosques. They, who in their countries don't even let the Christians build a tiny chapel, and who so often slaughter the nuns or the missionaries, and woe betide the citizens who protest, who exasperatedly boast, "Go exercise your rights in your own country." Woe betide the passerby who, walking amongst the merchandise, tramples on a bag, or a poster, or a statuette. "Racist! Racist!" Woe betide the policeman who approaches them to ceremoniously ask, "Mr. Steadyvenser, Your Excellency, please, would you care to move your stuff just an inch and let people walk?" They eat him alive. They bite him like vicious dogs. At the very least, they insult his mother, his father, his ancestors, his progeny, and the Florentines keep their mouths shut, intimidated, resigned, blackmailed by the word "racist." End quote. So, here you see the way it goes. The tent was removed, but nothing changed. They all got their passports, they all got what they wanted, their protest was successful, and they've all settled into their locations. And they all fill the streets, selling things, prostituting, selling drugs, harassing people, And nobody can say anything. Nobody does say anything. But if you dare to say anything, you're a racist. I know my rights. You see? They're rights. I know my rights. There's no such thing as rights. It's just a tool that people use to get what they want. You know, there's a certain, well, I'll go ahead and call it racism amongst the liberals. But it's the dangerous sort, because it's the sort that says, oh, these people, they could never pull one over on me. They need my help. They need my assistance. Like children. They're just good little boys. They're just like grown-up children, and they need our help. The idea that they could pose danger, the idea that they could exploit the liberals, that they could get one over on the liberals, never crosses their mind. Inconceivable. Useful idiots. And what makes them useful is their inability to conceive that these foreign invaders are smart enough to have figured out your game and turned it around on you. Oh, that could never happen. They need our help. Stupid fools. Liberals, and especially European liberals. Stupid fools who are way too overconfident in their intelligence. There's nothing more dangerous than a stupid person who thinks he's smart. You know, smart people tend to fall for propaganda because they think they're immune to propaganda. People of middling intelligence, such as myself, we recognize that we're susceptible to propaganda. We can be outsmarted. We have been outsmarted. So we're on our guard. Because we know there are threats out there in the world. We're not overconfident. Smart people get overconfident. And they think they'll never fall for propaganda. They think they'll never be outsmarted. And so sometimes being smart is a weakness. But the greatest weakness of all is when you're of middling intelligence, but you think you're smart. Because then you think you're immune to propaganda, but you're particularly susceptible to it because you're not smart. Those are the most dangerous people. Because they think they know what's best, not only for themselves, but for you. So it's just sad. She says the Florentines keep their mouths shut. They are blackmailed by the word racist. And that's sad. So having discussed the tent, a little bit later, she talks about Christianity a little bit. She says, quote, "For 2,000 years, our entity has been based upon a religion called Christianity, upon a church called Catholic Church. Take me as an example. I am an atheist. I am an anti-clerical. I have nothing in common with the Catholic Church, I always say. And it's true. But it's also untrue. Because, whether I like it or not, I have a lot in common with the Catholic Church. Damn if I do. How couldn't I? I was born in a landscape of domes, monasteries, Christs, Madonnas, saints, crosses, bells. The first music I heard when I came into this world was the music of the bells. The Santa Maria del Fiore Cathedral's bells, that at the time of the tent the muezzin's voice injuriously suffocated with his Allah Akbar. In that music, that landscape, the church to which even great minds like Dante Alighieri and Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo and Galileo Galilei bent, I have grown up. Through it, I have learned what sculpture and architecture and painting and poetry and literature are, what beauty combined with knowledge is. Thanks to it, I began to ask myself, what is good? What is evil? If God exists? If he invented us? Or we invented him? If the soul is a chemical formula that can be analyzed in laboratories or something more? And by God, see, I wrote, by God, again, with all my laicism, my anti-clericalism, my atheism, I am so imbued with Catholic culture that Catholic culture makes part of my written and spoken language. By God, for God, thank God, good heavens, good Lord, my Lord, Holy Jesus, Virgin Mary, Christ here, Christ there, for Christ's sake. These expressions come so spontaneously to me that I'm not even aware of pronouncing or writing them. And shall I say it all? Although I never forgave Catholicism for the infamies it imposed on me, starting with the fucking Inquisition, that in the 1600s also burned my foremother, Ildebranda, poor Ildebranda, the music of the bells caresses my heart. I like it so. I also like those beautifully painted Christs and Madonnas and saints. In fact, I collect old icons. I also like the abbeys and cloisters and monasteries. They give me an irresistible sense of serenity, and I often envy those who live inside. Besides, let's face it, our cathedrals are more beautiful than the mosques and the synagogues and the Buddhist temples and the bleak Protestant churches. My family cemetery is a Protestant cemetery. It accepts the dead of any religion, true, but it is a Protestant cemetery. One of my great-grandmothers was Waldensian. One of my great-aunts was evangelic. The Waldensian great-grandmother, I never knew her. She died young. The evangelic great-aunt, yes, I knew her. When I was a little girl, she used to take me to the religious services at her church, and what a bore! I felt so weary with those people, who did nothing but chant the Psalms, with that priest who was a pastor, not a priest, and did nothing but read the Bible. I felt so dreary in that church, which did not seem like a church, and only contained the pews, plus an enormous cross. Not a Jesus, not a Madonna, not an angel, not a saint, not a candle, silver, no incense. I even missed the stink of the incense. And I would have given a lot to be in the nearby Basilica of Santa Croce, where those things existed in plenty. The things, the symbolic frills, which belong to my life, to my culture. You know, in the garden of my Tuscany country house, I have a minuscule old chapel. It is always closed, alas. Since Mother died, nobody cares for it. So, when I go home, I open it. To dust the altar, to see if some mouse has made a nest or eaten some page of the missal. And despite my laicism, my atheism, there I feel at ease. Despite my anti-clericalism, there I feel at peace. And I bet that the majority of the Italians would confess to you the same. To me it was confessed, good heavens, by Enrico Berlinguer, the Secretary General of the then Italian Communist Party, the man who set on the historical compromise between the Marxists and the Catholics. For Christ's sake, and here we go again, I am saying that we Italians are not in the same condition as the Americans. We are not their melting pot, their mosaic of diversities glued together by a citizenship. I am saying that just because our cultural identity has been well defined for thousands of years, we cannot bear a migratory wave of people who have nothing to do with us, who are not ready to become like us, to be absorbed by us, like the Habsburg-Lorraines of Tuscany and the Bourbons of Naples, who, on the contrary, aim to absorb us, to change our principles, our values, our identity, our way of life, and who, in the meantime, molest us with their retrograde ignorance, their retrograde bigotry, their retrograde religion. I am saying that in our culture there is no room for the musicians, for the minarets, for the phony abstemious, for the humiliating chador, for the degrading burqa. And should that room exist, I wouldn't give it to them, because it would be like deleting our identity, like nullifying our accomplishments, like spitting on the freedom that we have earned, on the civilization that we have installed, on the welfare that we have achieved. It would be like selling my country, my patria. And my country, my patria, are not for sale. End quote. I like that section, talking about Christianity. She's an atheist. She says, but if you want to know the truth, I'm comfortable with it. I grew up around it. She says the first music she ever heard was the sound of the bells of the church. She likes it. She has a lot in common with it. It's her country. It's her patria. She's learned from it. She's learned what beauty is, what sculpture, architecture, painting, questions about good and evil. It fills her language. And, she's taking the Lord's name in vain. By God this, God damn it, Holy Jesus, Virgin Mary, so-and-so, Christ this, for Christ's sake. She says even though the Inquisition burned one of her foremothers, one of her ancestors, Hildebranda, was burned by the Inquisition, she says nevertheless, she still likes it. She still likes the bells and all the accoutrements, and she likes the churches. And she goes to a Protestant church, and she doesn't like it. She's barren. She finds it barren. It doesn't have all of the incense and the saints and the bells and this and that and all the other things that make up the culture of the Italian Catholic Church. She says, this is my culture. She says, this is not America. We are not a melting pot. Italy is not a melting pot. She says, moreover, they're not ready to be absorbed. They're not willing to assimilate. They're not going to come in and willingly join Italy and become Italians. They want to turn the Italians into Muslims. They didn't come to assimilate. They didn't come to join. They came to conquer. They want to absorb Italy into Islam. She says, there's just no room. There's no room for them, and if there was room for them, she wouldn't give it up anyway. And I just love the end. My country, my patria, are not for sale. And America is not for sale either. And the so-called melting pot, embracing all the people that show up on the shores, all and sundry, whoever can manage to crawl across the desert to get here is welcome. Well, I think that's got to end. It's no good for Italy, and maybe it's no good for us either. Thanks a lot for listening. I'll talk to you again next time.